Want 5 ways to lower your tariffs, including negotiating with your suppliers? Well, grab your notepad, because that's exactly what you're going to get right now. Hey everyone, Mike McClary back again with Kerim Kfuri, and I just want to thank you again, Kerim, for people who haven't seen the previous videos we've already been doing on this Tariff Survival Series. They really need to check them out, because the first couple ones we had on the China Plus one, how to really lean into the problems we're having and take advantage of it in order to make your business even stronger. Anyone who's getting starting, who's been doing this for 20 years, they've already got some great piece of information from me. So thank you so much for being with me in the series here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a great series, and I think it's extremely timely. I mean, so many businesses just really need to know how to handle things in these difficult times, be disruption proof. And, I'd love to be able to talk with you about, if you don't mind, 5 strategies that I've been discussing a lot these days around how to manage tariffs and how to manage these challenges in the global economy. That's all right.
Let's get right into them. I love that idea. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So let's start off with the first one, which I call absorption. So the idea is you have a tariff and everybody understands that that's an extra cost. And who is going to take on that cost? So that in the end, the consumer, which is the most important part of the global supply chain, doesn't really feel it. Or if they feel it, it's very minor or something that's not going to have them have them leave you, or an attrition rate. So with this in mind, you need to work on if you can have your supplier absorb a certain part of the tariffs, if your logistics provider would absorb a certain part of the tariffs, if you as a brand would absorb, or as a company would absorb certain part of the tariffs, and even let's say if you have some level of a distribution mechanism or some level of fulfillment, would they take on a certain part of the tariffs? Because there's so many links in the supply chain. And if that tariff can be shared equally or in parts so that in the end, the consumer doesn't really feel it, then that is the ultimate goal and objective. Because as soon as the consumer feels it in a way that hurts their pocket too much, then they leave and the entire supply chain, everybody upstream, gets broken down. So it's better that everybody just makes a little less to then keep the business rolling forward. So absorption is one of the first ideas. The second idea that we talked about in a previous question is about this idea of deferral of the tariffs. So do you basically take on the tariffs, but choose when to take on the tariffs? So you may ship goods, bring it into a place like a free trade zone or a US bonded warehouse, and then determine when you want to take products out of a warehouse to accordingly navigate when you will take on those tariffs, because they will only be taken on when you remove the goods from the warehouse. And this allows you to essentially create scenarios or strategies where you are able to manage the tariffs with your sales cycles and accordingly be able to determine when to take on products, when to sell, when not to sell, and so on. So it's a strategy around taking on the tariffs, but figuring out when to take them on according to your sales cycles and strategies. The third area is really around terms and conditions. And this one is one that I find to be very interesting, that many brands and companies don't really think about when it comes to the negotiation process with their supplier. So you have a long-term supplier, hopefully you have a good relationship. And what you're going to do is you're going to go back and you're going to say, listen, you don't want to lose the business with us. We don't want to lose the business with you. We have to keep the consumer happy. We can't afford these tariffs to take them right on the chin the way they are. So what we need to do is we need to figure out what we can do from a cash flow standpoint to keep the business rolling forward, keep the consumer happy, and keep you guys doing the work you got to do. So what we need to do is let's change the terms and conditions between us. So if we were, let's say, to give you a 50% deposit up front and a 50% deposit when the goods deliver, and then we're taking on these tariffs, how about we do something like a 25% deposit up front, and then a 25% when it's at the port, and maybe 25% when it gets to our location, and then a final 25% maybe 3 or 4 months later. And this allows us to take on the tariff, still sell to our customers, still maintain, resources and salespeople and not mess with the infrastructure of our company. And at the same time, keep business flowing between us. So yes, you supplier are playing the role of short-term bank on a certain portion of remainder deposits, but you're doing so because you are maintaining our relationship. And hopefully you're still making money doing so. That's a third one, terms and conditions. The fourth one is going to be what I find really exciting. We talked about this earlier today too, is opportunities in the face of chaos, meaning cost engineering. Can you actually make your product in a different way? Can you make it with a different material? Can you make it according to a different structural component or capabilities that reduces the cost of the product, but not necessarily reducing the cost of the price tag to the customer? And in doing so, can you actually potentially make more profitability? Can you be more profitable in this scenario and offset any kind of excessive tariff costs? Because you've reduced the cost of your product by 10% or 20% or 30%, simply because you're not using steel anymore, but now you're using aluminum or whatever you're doing that ends up being something that's more cost advantageous and maybe even more beneficial to the customer. Maybe now you're using a product that's more malleable or something that can accommodate different kinds of temperatures or conditions and so forth because you shifted. And you would have never done so if you didn't have this challenge of this tariff or high cost environment, staring you in the face. And then the final one, which I talk about around kind of tariff mitigation and strategies, is alternative supply chains. And we discussed that early on. I think it was the first question, because to do an alternative supply chain is your last resort. If you have a good, dependable supply chain, the last thing you want to do is try to shift away, because in doing so, you need to look at those 5 factors we discussed earlier, which are materials, output, resources, technology, and finally the costs. And if any of those things are not really in place, then that alternative supply chain isn't really a great first choice anymore. So those are the 5 ways that I tend to talk with different customers and companies, industry to industry, product to product, on how they may want to mitigate or look at sort of tariff discussions. And it really is going to be applicable depending upon the industry and the product.
This is great because, again, we talked about this previous video. This is one of those times where you're forced to take this threat, this speed bump, and turn something around out of it, make your business work and maybe make it stronger, because so many people are always afraid of, maybe changing up their products so that it's more cost efficient. People are always adding features, but very seldom do they try to make it, or not enough do they try to make it more cost efficient. I had to do that purely out of the need because of this year. I had to source a different flashlight that I found out people still love, and it's about 25% of the cost of the one that I was before. And it's great. This is one of those, it's kind of like I have a doctor appointment next week and I know that I'm going to get my cholesterol checked and my weight. It forces me to make some changes right now that I probably should have been making for the previous 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's amazing how, we think about this idea, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Right. And this is an idea that we all tend to sit on because our brains look towards doing the least amount of effort possible, because that's how we save energy. And we just, as human beings in our early development, was all about energy conservation, because we didn't know when the next meal was going to come from or where we were going to be or what was the next water source, caveman days. But the reality of it is that we're not in caveman days anymore. So we need to use our brains. We need to understand that it's not about energy conservation. It's about the efficient use of energy. And sometimes that comes through an alternative pathway or a different kind of way of doing a process.
So true. Number 3, also about terms, conditions. What a great way to approach negotiating with your supplier. Because too often people think it's the price. It's the price. And if you can get, I don't know about you, but if I'm able to get better terms where I can put some of the money I'm paying on the back end, that is even better than saving, a few cents on every unit, because cash flow is everything in this business. And being able to do that keeps them in business. It saves you, like you said. This is probably the perfect time for brands who've never really felt like they had the ability to negotiate to go in and negotiate.
Absolutely. And then back to my example where I sort of took a 50% deposit and 50% deposit, and I split it up into 4 payments of 25%. Let's just give an example like that. If a supplier is making a 25% margin, basically they're in the green anyway. I mean, they're not really red, but they're maintaining the business. And that's really what it is with a supplier to say, look, we've worked together for a while. Take the profits you would have made on this deal and use it as our insurance policy between us to keep the business between us. And so in this way, they're not necessarily losing anything, but at the same time, they need to wait a little bit longer for their profitability instead of losing the entire account. And that's how you have to sort of frame it when you're really in these more dramatic times where it's either like we're doing business or we're not doing business anymore. There's no in between. So
Well, awesome. Thanks, Karim. I love those 5 strategies, but we are not done yet. We're still going to talk a little bit about, what if you're someone new to this business and I can't even imagine, by the way, Karim, if I just got involved in this business this year and I'm like, has it always been this way? And
oh yeah.
it has not always been quite as crazy. So in the next video, we're going to talk about if you're starting out, how do you actually navigate and proceed with tariffs being the way that they are right now? So come back, watch that video, and we'll see you then.